Hello everyone and welcome to the Fuse webinar Wednesday for April. My name is Chris Price. I'm one of the working group's directors. What I'm going to do first is talk you through a quick update from the board of directors before we actually move on to our main topic for today, which is an update from the CSS 2018, which happened earlier last month. We've got representatives from all of the different working groups here to explain some of the work they did and some of the work they're planning to do over the next little while. So, in terms of an update from the Fuse boards of directors, the first thing to let you know about is the Fuse Connect that's happening in the US for the first time this year, and that's happening between the 3rd and the 6th of June in Raleigh. There are less than 50 registration spots left available, and you can download the detailed flyer from the Fuse websites. In terms of hotels that are available, the Sheraton and the Marriott have now both sold out, but we do still have some rooms available at the Raleigh Residence Inn Marriott for people to book on that side, and details are all on the website for that. Moving on to November, the Fuse Connect in the EU is taking place between the 4th and 7th of November in Frankfurt in Germany. Registration is now open, and the early bird registration will close on the 27th of July. Important to remember, though, is that the call for papers for this will be closing on the 30th of April. So do make sure you get abstracts in this week if you're planning to submit a paper to hopefully present at the conference. Discounted rates are available at both the Maritime Hotel and the Frankfurt Marriott. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. And some news hot off the press. In 2019, the Fuse Connect in the US will be taking place in Baltimore, at the Baltimore Marriott Waterfront Hotel. And that will take place between the 24th and 27th of February. Note that it's going to be earlier in the year than it is this year. So start your planning now, and more information will be coming in June following this year's Connect event in the US. Going on next month, in terms of single-day events throughout the world, on the 15th of May, there's a single-day event in Frankfurt in Germany, and on the 17th of May in Collegeville in PA, and then in Asia Pacific, we've got on the 11th of May an event in Tokyo, on the 18th of May an event in Beijing, and on the 19th of May we've got an event in Bangalore in India. So if you're able to get to any of those, I encourage you to attend, as these are free for members. Also coming soon, or actually now released, the Fuse annual report. Details will be in the monthly mailing for May, which will be sent out next week. So please do have a read of this and find out about all the different ways that Fuse helps our community. Also, a few updates in terms of communications with and from Fuse. The Fuse newsletter will be moving for the next issue to be an electronic only copy, and that next issue will be published, we expect, on the 1st of June. You can follow Fuse on social media, on Twitter via the handle at Fuse Twitter, on Facebook through Fusebook, on LinkedIn through Fuse Office, and on YouTube through FuseTube. And so, as I said, the monthly mailing will be coming out on Tuesday next week, the 1st of May. And also don't forget to download the Fuse app from the Apple Store or Google Play. And lastly, a quick plug for our next webinar Wednesday, which will take place on the 23rd of May. So look out for your invites in your inbox for that. And the topic for that webinar will be the Fuse working group updates. and that will be at 10 a.m. East Coast US time, 3 p.m. in the UK, and 4 p.m. In Europe. So now we can move on to the main topic of the webinar, which is the Fuse CSS meeting. So I'm going to switch slide decks very quickly. It's that one. Okay. So before we dive into, oh no, wrong slide deck, sorry. That one. So before we dive into updates from the individual working groups, I just want to give a very quick update of what actually took place at the conference outside of the working groups. So we had, as usual, what looks like a very short agenda, but actually is really packed with so much going on, especially in all the working group sessions, which I'm looking forward to hearing about shortly. But we kicked off the event with an opening session from the FDA. This is a brand new opening session where FDA staff walked us through what the reviewer process is once the data arrives at FDA as part of the filing. On that side, and that's just to let you know that the slides, that was actually filmed, not the slides, that was filmed, and you can actually view that session on FuseTube. And there's a link on these slides which will be shared later. We then sort of broke into all the working group sessions, and they continued all the way through Monday and Tuesday. And then on Tuesday, we closed with a session really discussing the collaborations that are taking place between Fuse, CDISC, and FDA. And one of the questions we asked and got feedback on was if we can give one message to Fuse, CDISC, and FDA, what would it be about collaboration? And I think a key message that came out of that was really keep it small, keep it simple, and keep it moving. So really continue these collaborations and really look to continue delivering the benefits that all our projects have done in the past and continue to do so. On top of the sort of core agenda, there were 3 different workshops that took place. So one on RDF, one was a combined workshop between the optimizing the use of data standards and non-clinical topics working groups looking at the SDRG. And then lastly, a workshop hosted by the Standard Code and Scripts working group, which looked at GitHub. As usual at the conference, we had a poster session where people were given the opportunity to share their work of what had been done either within the working groups or based on topics around the working groups. We had 3 different winners, and all these posters are available on the Fuse website. And the poster winner for the FDA was by Paul and Weyer on the FDA Study Data Technical Performance Guide updates for software programs and submissions, which gave an overview of FDA expectations of how sponsors should provide software programs used to create ADAM datasets, tables, figures, and listings. And gave a lot of guidance for statistical programmers across the industry that really we felt closed an important gap on how to conform to technical requirements in submissions. For industry, Thomas and William presented on Bioaccelerate Toxicology Data Sharing Initiative, the development of a centralized searchable preclinical setup. So Bioaccelerate is a subsidiary of Transcelerate, and it's an industry consortium which drives efficiency in the early stages of drug development. So they shared about the centralized platform to enable participants to make more informed decisions on compounds progression based on increased understanding of on-target and off-target toxicity. And lastly, the last presentation was from the collaboration. That was a global view of clinical trial transparency and disclosure events for a single study and product submissions, presented by Julie. And this was on behalf of the CS CTT working group. and this demonstrates how various clinical documents are reused over time for different publishing and disclosure events, and really gave a great picture of the global view for a single study and product submission, and the challenges caused by different requirements and timelines for different various regulatory agencies. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of introducing what took place at the conference. So what I'll do now is hand over to Jean-Marc, who will talk about the data transparency working group. While I'm doing that, just a reminder to everyone that if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask me or any of the other presenters, please remember to put those in the chat window, and we will address those at the end of the session.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. I will tell you briefly about the Data Transparency Working Group and what we've achieved at the CSS. So our group actually address a number of areas that are linked to data identification and data sharing. We started off in 2014 mainly around data identification standard and providing a standard for data identification on DTM. And I would say for the past 2 years, we've been focusing a lot on what we call Policy 70 interpretations and look at different challenges that came with Policy 70, where we could add value by providing white papers or guidance or simply providing some reviews. The last year or so, we've been working on a data transparency roadmap to try to link all the different requirements related to study disclosure and data disclosure. And I would say on an ongoing basis, we've also been reviewing a number of guidances, a number of policies coming from EMA, Health Canada, FDA, Translate, and also Cochrane. In some cases, through the collaboration we have with those parties, we're able to get access to draft before they are published and provide comments in advance. And in some cases, we are simply able to review them afterwards and try to provide comments and explanation through other means. This year, we've also launched different initiatives. They are not all fully active around GDPR, data sharing processes, identification, automation and risk analysis, anonymization of imaging data, and handling of highly identifying data. We've kicked off some work on GDPR actually last week, but we haven't had a chance to obviously publish anything so far. At the CSS, we did focus on only a few aspects of all the work that we do. We had a great presentation by the FDA about the data sharing initiatives. We've been then reviewing the different deliverable from the data transparency roadmap, the poster that actually Chris was presenting just before, and how to evolve that into a white paper. And we've been touching upon about the handling of narratives and how to define data utility in Policy 70 submissions. We had a mix of, you could say, more PowerPoint type of sessions with some content being presented and some Q&A, and a number of sessions that were more interactive, where we were splitting into few groups and we're working on a whiteboard to address different specific questions related to the topics listed for the 2 days. I'd like to thank in particular the co-organizers of those 4 days, Julie Hospel from AstraZeneca, Gregory Campbell from Gilead, and Rashmi Dodia from MMS Holdings. So in terms of the presentation from the FDA, Anne Witt gave us an overview of the very recent initiative that the FDA has launched around sharing of CSR. She presented the process. She presented some of the technical aspects of what the FDA will do to redact the CSR before sharing them, the scope, and so on and so forth, which was, I think, quite enlightening, especially in March, while the announcement was made in January. Since then, the first pilot has been conducted, actually with Johnson & Johnson, and the CSRs have been published. So there's been some progress made since we had this presentation on the topic. One of the interesting points that we've tried to make during that session was to look at differences between EMA, Health Canada, and now the FDA sharing initiative. We discussed how different interpretations of commercially confidential information could be done across regulators, the process that could be different in some case, and also the scope, which we plan to work on and try to see how the three differ and overlap. We then had a review of the data transparency roadmap visual that has been created by Julie and her team. This visual show all the different, you could say, milestones across legislation where we would have requirements to provide deliverables. One of the comments from the audience was indeed to also try to look at where there is recognition mechanism, and also try to see how the different deliverables are more or less relevant for different type of audiences. This poster won the Best Collaboration Best Paper Award, which was, of course, a good achievement. The last topic that we discussed on the last day were around narratives and data utility. We have a white paper that is in draft right now on how to address narratives in a reactive approach. We also discussed what could be a proactive approach. We had some examples from certain companies who are looking into that, and what sort of process and organizational changes that such approach will involve. And then we had an interactive session around trying to define the business requirements that an industry solution will need to have in order to tackle reactive anonymization of CSR that is Policy 70 compliant. The last sessions were around data utility, and we've been making good progress on trying to define a qualitative and a quantitative scale to measure data utility in anonymized CSR. Such scale could be used for sponsors to actually justify how they've prioritized and optimized data utility in the CSR that they are sharing through Policy 70 or other. The next step for us are to finalize all those deliverables and publish them, and we also plan to create an overview and comparison of EMA, Health Canada, and FDA data sharing initiatives. Thank you. I will now pass over to Ian, who will tell you about the Educating the Future working group.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Marc. Just so everybody knows, my co-lead for this working group, Jim McDermott, is also on the phone, and so he may be piping in to comment on some of the slides as I present here. So wrapping up our CSS 2018, it was actually our first year being a working group. We presented last year as a proposal for a project within the Emerging Trends and Technologies working group, but we actually became a working group ourselves during the course of the last year. And this year was our first year in attending as a working group. So we currently have 3 projects within the working group. We have a data engineering project, a machine learning and AI project, and a design thinking project. During the actual well, I guess to recap around what the goal of this working group is, because everyone may not be aware of us because we are fairly new. The whole goal of this working group is to kind of come up with different frameworks to educate the community at large. And so the whole goal of this is to try to figure out where in the industry we may have skill gaps. And so I think data engineering and AI and design thinking are, the initial areas we chose to focus on. And what we're going to be doing is coming up with a lot of different content and sharing with people links to different places where they can actually go out and learn more about a lot of these different topics. And the goal here is to try to get the industry up to speed with what's going on outside of the industry in some of these other areas. The 2 co-leads are myself and Jim. You can see us here. Jim decided to be pretty cheeky this morning, and he added a video to the presentation. And it's his idea of what he really wants this working group to be. So afterwards, when we present or we provide the slides to you, you can actually click on that link and see what we hope to achieve here, at least at a somewhat esoteric level.
It's definitely safe for work, Ian, just to say.
Yes, it is definitely safe for work. In terms of the different working groups, or sorry, the different projects, starting with the design thinking project that's actually being led by Crystal Allard and myself. These are the individual members that you can see here. As always with these working groups, and especially since we are new working groups, or sorry, new projects, we're always going to be recruiting for people. So if you see any project you actually are interested in, please go ahead and let Jane know, or Wendy know, or myself, or Jim know, and we'd be more than happy to have you in any of these different projects that we're currently running. This is the machine learning project led by Nicholas Dupuis and Kevin Lee from Clean Data Insight. And you can see this one actually has the most members at the moment. And then the data engineering group led by Guy Garrett and Bev Hayes. So in terms of what happened at the CSS for us, we actually only met on the first day because we were so new and we didn't actually have a lot of membership attending from a lot of the different projects because the projects weren't really underway at the time. And so what we decided to do was just meet at a working group level on the first day, and that meant that everybody from the individual projects within the working group, we all met together. And what we really wanted to do was allow each of the project leads to introduce their project and try to recruit new members. Because obviously at the CSS, there's a lot of other attendees, and it is a chance for people to kind of show what their project is doing and to try to recruit people to join them. So I think that was the goal of this original meeting for that day. So I think it was pretty good because we're trying to do something a little bit different in the working group. I think mostly what happens in a lot of the other working groups is that the projects are allowed to kind of do their own thing, but we're trying to coordinate a little bit on the working group level here. So one of the things that we're trying to do is actually create a repository. And so we had a lot of discussions about like what that repository should be, what are some of the features in terms of putting content up there and maintaining that content and getting access to everyone in the industry who actually wants the access. And we wanted to do that across all the different projects, and we want to do it in a somewhat kind of consistent way. And so, I think it was really important for the projects to get in the same room to have an understanding of what this repository was and was not. And so as part of that exercise, we actually went through a design thinking session where we gathered a bunch of requirements and tried to figure out exactly what it was that the project wanted out of this tool. It was really good to have Sasha Erweiler in the room as well because he helped us understand from the higher level board perspective, like what exactly Fuse would want out of this from an organizational perspective and not necessarily just the projects or the working groups. So I think it was really invaluable to have his input in that session. In addition to that, since this is an education initiative, one thing we also want to incorporate here is, face-to-face interactions and maybe some different learning sessions and things like that. So we had a lot of ideas around how we would do that. So, for example, for a very long time, there have been interactive learning sessions that have been happening at both the Connects and the CSS and at the SDEs and things like that. A lot of things from like Tim Williams on semantic technology and stuff like that. And we want to kind of continue that type of thing. And so we wanted to figure out what are the SDEs that are coming up in the Connects and what are the different topics that we can do. And I'm happy to say that for the US Connect that's happening in June, there's actually going to be a fairly significant design thinking session that's happening in the management stream. And I actually encourage everybody to go to that, and that's actually going to be run by Crystal Allard and myself and Carl Conrad from Merck. And it's going to be a good place for us to showcase the work or the project and the working group and a lot of the stuff that we are working on. But in addition to that, there's going to be machine learning sessions at a lot of these things. And I think we're talking to Chris Hurley and a few people on the SDE side to figure out how we can actually incorporate some interactive sessions into SDEs, rather than just having the SDEs be places where people go and present things. We want it to be interactive and maybe solutionary. Okay, to go through the approach a little bit, I don't want to get too much into the design thinking session, but it was much more about allowing each individual who was in the room. I think we had probably about 20 or so people in the room, allowing each one of them to write down what their desires for the repository would be. And we basically put them all out on the table, and we voted on them. And then eventually, at the end of the day, we kind of came up with these 4 major themes. One was that it needed to be user-friendly. I think user-friendly both from the content generation side and also from the consumption side. We wanted to get usage measured and analytics. That was something that Sasha was really, he really wanted to have that, and I think it makes good sense because then we can track how much is this being used, how many people are going to it and stuff like that, and we can adjust accordingly if we need to. trying to make it accessible, so accommodating a lot of different users and types of users, and then also configurable. So we didn't want something that was too rigid, but maybe not something that is way too customizable that it became a little too unwieldy to manage. But I think in the end of the day, we got a pretty good set of requirements, and everyone in the room seemed to be happy to participate in this as well. So at the end of the day, what we decided to do was we took all the requirements, we kind of looked out and saw what was out there, and we decided on Squarespace. So those of you who are in the US may be familiar with Squarespace. Squarespace is basically a content management system and website builder. It is very easy to use, especially for content authors, but it also has really great design. And so like when you're going into this, it looks fairly modern, like modern websites. It doesn't look like something that's from the late 90s or anything like that. So I think this is something that we selected. We're pretty excited about it. We actually went to the Fuse board and we got approval from them to actually go ahead and do this. There is a cost associated with it, and Fuse has agreed to kind of pay that cost. It's not substantial, but it is something. And then so currently Jim and I are kind of putting together a high-level repository framework. So around like the overall hierarchy of the pages and things like that, and kind of working with Squarespace and understanding some of the little nuances and intricacies, working with it, and then we'll socialize that out to the projects, and then we'll start putting content out there. In terms of the individual projects and their goals at the moment, a lot of them are just having initial project meetings. I know the data engineering team is definitely way in front of this because they've actually had a number of meetings so far. So good for them to kind of take the lead and go out in front. Machine learning is getting up as well, and design thinking is starting to schedule our first bi-weekly meetings. So again, anybody who wants to join any of those, please go ahead and let us know. And then stay tuned for a lot of updates, because I think once we start rolling here, it's actually going to be going pretty quickly. So thank you. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to Patty.
Hey, great. Thank you, Ian. Welcome, everyone. Can everyone see my slides? Yeah. Okay. I'm Patricia Brundage, and I'm the co-lead of the Non-Clinical Topics Working Group, along with Sue DeHaven. Today, I'm going to give you an overview of what we did at CSS this year and discuss our ongoing projects and some possible new projects for 2018.
Sorry, Patty, just to interrupt you. Can you? There we go.
Is that good? Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
So not only did we have a record turnout this year with over 70 people joining us, including some new folks who brought some great new ideas, there was a lot of involvement from those attending, which made it a very valuable experience. And I think it's this involvement and enthusiasm of the group that has helped us make so much progress with SIND implementation to date. Our keynote speaker, we started off with a bang with our keynote speaker, Dr. Lilian Rosario, who gave a motivating talk about how the many projects and deliverables of the working group over the years have positively impacted SEND implementation. And she ended by presenting a poster asking where we should go from here, that I'll discuss in the next slide, which generated some really great ideas. Prior to the meeting, our 8 working groups provided project updates to the group, and on Monday, several of the groups gave presentations on their deliverables, including the proposed Living Wiki white paper by the Data Consistency Group and a demo of the body weight gain script by the Non-Clinical Scripts Group. The results of our 3rd annual SEND readiness survey were also presented, which is always a much anticipated CSS highlight. The team updated the survey this year, adding some new questions. So in addition to getting a good idea of how industry is doing moving forward towards SEND implementation, we also found out how industry is using the SEND datasets internally, what is being done to ensure that datasets accurately represent the study data, and what obstacles the industry is facing right now with regards to implementation. The full survey is posted on our wiki for you to look at. So it was actually the SEND survey result that prompted the industry impacts of eData implementation panel, which I will discuss a little bit later. On Tuesday, we started out the day with a great presentation and discussion about the non-clinical data sharing initiatives of BioCellerate and eTranssafe. Both initiatives are using eData with the aim of increasing the development of computational strategies and tools to improve the predictivity and reliability of translational safety assessment. The session ended with a demonstration of the histographic tool created by the Histopathology Visualization team, and this was done through a collaboration with eTranssafe, who provided the necessary eData for development. And we ended with an informative update on the CDISC send work that is ongoing. Here is a poster of the eData submission process presented by Lilian Rosario at the end of her presentation, along with the request to add ideas about what can be done to further the eData submission process. And as always, our group stepped up to the challenge, filling the board with lots of great ideas for future projects for FUSE, CDISC, and the FDA. I've highlighted a few here. There was a suggestion to increase visualizations, which can be taken on as a task by our non-clinical scripts group. There was also a suggestion to model flow cytometry data in SEND, which is a proposed new non-clinical project for 2018. And the FDA and Demystifying Defined Code List group have taken on identifying the use of the defined file in SEND. This poster, along with all the proposed ideas, are summarized in an outcome presentation on our FUSE Wiki, and I encourage you to take a look at it. So the non-clinical projects have been making some great progress and providing valuable recommendations for eData use and generating some really innovative deliverables that were discussed at CSS. The Histopathology Visualization project generated this interactive histographic tool for visualizing histopathology data from multiple toxicology studies, and this was through their collaboration with eTranssafe. The Data Consistency project, which has worked to identify differences between the SEND dataset and study report and provide recommendations on how to handle these discrepancies. So when they were writing their white paper, they realized that the identification of new inconsistencies, as well as the evolving understanding of regulatory needs, would quickly make this paper obsolete. So they came up with a really innovative idea for a living interactive wiki white paper, where the community would be invited to contribute new scenarios and possible solutions. The Demystifying Defined Code List project, which is working to address key questions about the non-clinical defined.xml code list, also plans to present their best practice recommendations via the wiki. So even more great projects, we had the non-clinical scripts team who presented their body weight gain script, and now they're planning to build on what they learned from this script and create visualizations of the data in the LB and other domains. As always, our ever valuable SEND implementation user group continues to be a valuable resource to the community. And the ADA modeling group presented a poster at CSS with their proposed modeling of ADA data in SEND IG 3.0, which I got some great feedback on and are now working to address. As I said, another highlight was the eData implementation impacts and challenges panel discussion. So we divided the group up into 6 different groups based on their industry and asked them to identify the best impacts of eData implementation, the implementation challenges they have overcome, and what challenges they currently face. So this proved to be a very successful and valuable exercise, leading to some great discussions. The non-clinical core team is currently discussing the identified challenges for potential FUSE projects. And we've during CSS, we came up with some three new proposed projects for 2018. The first is improving the non-clinical topics wiki to help make information and key deliverables easier to find and navigation simpler. There was a proposed project on linked data education to help educate the non-clinical group on how linked data can be used with non-clinical e-data. And the third proposed project is the modeling of flow cytometry data in SEND. The full agenda, posters, presentations, and outcomes of the non-clinical topics working group at CSS can be found on a terrific wiki webpage created by my fabulous co-lead, Sue. It is accessible from our main wiki page and also the link on the slide. So I encourage you to sit down and take a look at the great content generated by our working group at the 2018 CSS. And I'd like to end the presentation with a huge thanks to the non-clinical attendees who helped make CSS such a huge success this year. It's really our members who continue to make this group so successful. So if you're interested in joining one of our non-clinical projects or finding more about the non-clinical topics working group, please reach out to Sue or me. Our emails are at the bottom of the slide. Thank you so much, and now I will pass it over to Jeff.
I think Henming was going first.
Oh, I'm sorry, we changed. Sorry, that Hemming.
Henming.
Jane, could you do that for me?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
Just while we're doing that, just a reminder to everyone, if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat window on your screen.
Hello, everybody hear me?
Yes, we can, and we can see your slides.
Okay, good. Good morning. Yeah, I'm going to give a report on what we have done in the CSS conference for our working group, so standard analysis and code sharing. So this group was co-led by me and Mary Nielsen, so she's not available today. So this group was forming based on a simple idea that we want to have a shared open toolbox, basically that every company developing different tools, and some of that you have done that repeatedly for many, many times. But a good idea is that if everybody contribute a little bit the tool that put into a shared environment that everybody can access, that will increase the value of what the work that you have done. And this will create a lot of useful tools that can be used by many people. So based on this simple idea that when we form this working group, we have talked about the vision. Our vision is that we want to create a collaborative environment so that people can contribute, can share. So we have identified GitHub as our repository for documentation and for script and for things that we would like to share. And based on this, the idea is that we want to industry, FDA, and academia to contribute and share and to collaborate this environment. So based on this, we have evolved from initially just have some white paper, have some scripts that we developed or acquired from some of the contributors, and some that actually we got from FDA. And so we build on this, we have formed other group and projects. So based on that, you can see currently we have 3 focus areas and 7 active projects. So this 3 focus areas, one is that the script repository. Basically, this is a platform and the environment that we collaborate. So underneath that, we have script discovery acquisition project, basically that to review and document the script that are contributed by others. And then we have the repository content and delivery. This is basically the group that to develop some scripts based on the white paper that we have developed. And then the other one is the repository governance and the infrastructure. Basically, this is group will maintain the repository and define some guidelines for contribution and the process of reviewing script. And then we later develop, we felt the need that we need to have test data. So we formed the test data that led by Peter. And this project already has done many things that they already have the first set of updated data set already uploaded in the repository. And then the other projects are script metadata for sharing. So we have some script data, but we do need to have a way to clearly document those scripts. And then the second focus area, actually, this is one that when we formed the working group, this is kind of a very first thing we did is to have a white paper to document the best practice. Right? And then another focus is the communication, promotion, and education. So based on all that, this is just a background information, but in this conference, we have done follow-up since we update our progress to the whole group about our vision, motivation, progress, and then the issue of our project. And then we provided some detailed updates on the white paper, test data factory, script metadata for sharing project. And we have a workshop in the evening on Monday to actually provide some detailed information about the GitHub environment and what are the process that we use to validate, we qualified those scripts that we receive. And then we have joint meetings with other working groups like data visualization, and we have talked about education for future with the different working groups. So basically, that's our reach out session during the conference. And follow that, we had a brainstorm session and then break out to discuss the different topics. So, but we feel there's important things about the culture, right? We have been doing that for many years, but still there's a tendency that the people work in silo, right? It's a little bit hard to sharing. So I think there's a culture change or paradigm shifting is needed in order to further this kind of create this kind of sharing environment. I think the fourth thing, in order for to do that, I think we feel that important is to do, to the communication, promotion, education part that we need to do. So in the workshop, we really look at the target that we defined in the white paper, and we actually identify one and use that kind of to go through our qualification process and the guidelines for qualified script. And then we explore the GitHub environment and look at the scripts that in the repository. We have a SAS and ARP scripts already in the repository. And then we have look at the progress in the script metadata. And then we did some demo about how to use those the scripts that we have created. So that in this workshop, we have gone through the R package that we developed to define the web application framework for looking at the scripts in the repository and look at the metadata in the repository. So if you want to try this out, so it's very simple that to install that package. And if you can just install that package views, and if you already have R, then you can just run that to download. But if you want the latest version, that we're still working on this, we want to add a few more things into it. You can use the install package, the dev tool, and do the install GitHub to get that. So this is the workshop that we have used that to do some demo about the progress that we have done in the script sharing, script metadata for sharing. So for other projects, the white paper project, they have discussed ways to improve participations in the review process, because we have developed this white paper, but we need to have more people to review it and contribute. Some of that are already in the version 2. So our initial plan is to publish like 10 white papers. So in this, you can see that some of that it was check mark, which means they are already published. They are in a Fuse website. I think it is in the Fuse deliverable catalog area. So if you can go there, you can find all those published white papers. And then in this year, we have pretty ambitious goals that we want to have 4 additional white paper that to be maybe published or maybe finish the draft. So this is our schedule. So in the script repository, we discussed the metadata for script, and we have discussed the ideas how to basically create the scripts to do the table figures and listings. And basically I did find that some of the sponsors may not have work on it. So if some of the sponsors that they already have that, we would encourage people to share. Right? For those ones that they don't have, we need to start the development. And then we discussed the possibility for restructuring. So we're talking about initially we have 3 focus areas, but we feel the importance of the test data that led by Peter's group. Because any that script you develop that you want to test out, and for the fully tested, you really need a good test data. You need to think about the different scenarios you want to test the script. So this project, they already have the SDTM data set updated and loaded in the repository. Currently, they're working on the ADAM data sets. The hope that can be finished this year. And then we want to reorganize kind of the other project within the repository group, because those separate projects, we want to have them work together, have some of the synergy, really push it, some of the project forward this year. And then this is the test data factory that the teams, they have bi-weekly meeting. So if you are interested in joining them and really to work with Peter, I think another thing that I work on and really I think is important is generate simulated test data. Right, there are so many different scenarios that you want to have corresponding test data tested out. So can simulate what you want, that would be pretty good. And another thing that we discussed very intensively in the meetings, that how we can communicate, promote what we have done so far, how we can create a set of videos or some slides so that we can package it so that people can go to the area that they can follow that to get some of education about what we have done. So I think we will be working very close with the INS working group for those. So we have identified some of the things we need to do this year. So this team is pretty much very, very hard to try to create some of the videos this year. So if you are interested in this, please join us. So for the whole working group, we have identified our things we would like to do basically this year, and some of them maybe planned for next year. So we need to finish our team restructuring, hope in the second quarter of this year. And then the white paper team, they have 4 white papers they are working on, and some of the version 2 that's already in the public review. And the data testing factory, they have their target set for ADAM to be finished this year. And then the repository team, we are working on the script metadata, hope that we can have a white paper finished this year. And then our CPT, basically the communication education team, they have identified a few scripts that will be to be worked on. I think in the quarter 2 and the quarter 3, there's already some of two already identified. So this is our working group. So if you are interested, you want to participate, you can join our list so you can get updated information. So this is all from me. So I need to hand this to Jeff.
Hey there. So I'm going to very briefly flick through the topics that we covered at the Trends and Technologies group that undertook at the CSS. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to blitz through it. We had 4 groups meeting at the CSS. The first one was obviously the clinical trials data as RDF. They had a good couple of productive days. First day they looked at their ontology that they covered it, trying to work out how to sort of move beyond their original scope of just representing the SCTM to looking more generally at clinical data. They've also done a lot of work in terms of cross-pollinating some of the ideas that they've uncovered as part of their EDC system, as part of their project itself, which was really, really interesting to watch. Next day, they were focusing on some work around being able to essentially work out how to automatically take a SAS transport file, move it across to linked data, and then be able to create the STTM from the linked data, effectively round-tripping the data. And they talked about then actually being able to combine it back to some of the capture elements, the pilot data CRFs. I think this diagram speaks for itself. Really interesting presentation. Very nice to see sort of the use of these technologies. Since the project, they are obviously presenting at the US Connect, which is great. I think that's awesome that we can get that out there. They've been working again. Sorry, this is hiding. Looking at converting a transport file into a graph file, and then continuing development of their ontology. And I wish I had time to make these meetings because it sounds like they're absolutely fascinating. One of the really cool things, one of the things we like to encourage as views is sort of outward facing this. So they've been talking, or they're planning a meeting with the OBO Foundry to look about actually hosting the ontology as and when it's complete. Next one is cloud adoption. They had a discussion at the event about actually updating their framework document. Do they want to? Who would they change it in any way, shape, or form? Where should it be focused? And the conversation was brisk and very productive. Basically, they've moved forward. Obviously, Tony Hewer stepped away after many years of long service. Anders is now responsible for the group. They're running bi-weekly video conference meetings. They're reviewing the existing framework. They didn't have any particular updates at this time. Next one, data visualization. The 3 streams sort of focused on each of their topics moving forward. These slides will be available obviously afterwards. They seem to be very productive. I didn't have much more deeper insight on that. So they wrap up the continued collaborations. Obviously, this is great. Like I said, we want to be able to make sure that we can share the intellect, cross-pollinate as much as possible, and get all this stuff out there because that's what Fuse is about, getting the industry together and making it work. Research on fire. There was only a couple of us there. We did some overviews of what the project's been doing up to now. Obviously, they're currently focused on getting the paper ready for the US Connect event, which is coming up very soon. The paper's in review at the moment. Blockchain group are about to provide a white paper that's going to go in for review. They're looking at some of the analyses as to how blockchain can be used, what sort of use cases make sense for it. The white paper, they've obviously presented a couple of times. They're aiming for a presentation, obviously, at the Fuse conference, and then a DIA poster in 2018. Thank you. And I'm going to hand it over very quickly to Jane.
Thank you. All right. I only have a few slides, as you can see. On behalf of Lisa Brooks and myself, I'm going to give you a summary on the Optimizing the Use of Data Standards working group and what we accomplished at the CSS this year. And I will get to presentation mode. Pull that up. Maybe. All right. Well, all right. You can see my picture of Scotland. Here we go. Thank you. Just as a background on what our working group is about, the name pretty much says what we are involved in, data standards. We work with CDISC, and we also oversee projects which close the gaps within the standards and providing document templates that have been identified in FDA guidance. instead of going through each and every project because we don't have time, this table shows the projects that we have going on. Did we have a session in the CSS? Because we do have a lot of projects. Unfortunately, not everyone could make it to the CSS. We have several new projects. One of them has been moved to the Data Transparency Working Group, as Jean-Marc indicated in his slides. But we also have 3 other new ones. The column Can I Join is for those projects that are still recruiting members. Some of the projects really don't need any members. They're well on their way to coming to a completion, or there's enough members. So if you can just look at the column Can I Join and go out to our Fuse Wiki. On our page, we have for optimizing the use of data standards, it has a description of the projects, and then you can click on that project to take you to the page for that project and who to contact if you are interested, or Lisa or myself. But we do have a lot going on. We've got several projects that are going to come to completion this year so that we can work on new ones. What we also talked about at the CSS, we did have a workshop with a non-clinical to talk about the Study Data Reviewer's Guide and what are the requirements, best practices, on making sure that these guides are updated on a consistent basis to be in alignment with the Technical Conformance Guide. Non-clinical, kudos to you because you have a better process. We don't really have one within our working group for the clinical SDRG, but wonderful input. Thanks everyone for joining that workshop and putting together this information on how can we make sure that the templates are up to date. Lisa and I then continued that discussion on Tuesday because it doesn't really affect just the reviewer's guides or the SDRG. It also affects other documents that we have, the ADRG, the SDSP, and we are working with the steering committee and non-clinical to define and implement that approach, much like we have an approach for deliverables for any working group. In the process of getting those deliverables to the steering committee and going through that review, we need to have a process now for being able to get feedback and to make sure that our templates are updated once a year, twice a year, but on a consistent basis so that we are in alignment with what is in the Technical Conformance Guide. There was one new project that has been approved after the CSS. It's Data Standards for Observational Studies. You can read what the problem statement is and working on what the deliverables will be. The project has been approved and the 2 people that are leading that, and we'll work with Wendy to get a mail shot out and ask for volunteers. They're updating the scope. We've got to refine that scope a little bit better as far as what that deliverable is going to be, and then we can get this project started. If you have any questions, you can contact Lisa, myself, or Wendy at Fuse. And that is it. Who do I need to send this back to? Is it Jane?
If you send it to Jane, then yes. So okay. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour, so I'd like to thank everyone for joining, and in particular to all our presenters. A big thank you for sharing all the great work that went on at CSS this year. If you do have any questions, we've run out of time here and there's nothing actually on the chat window yet. But if you have any questions, please do feel to send them through to the Fuse office, which is office@fuse.eu on that side. And lastly, if you want to find out anything more about any of the projects or want to volunteer for any of those projects, you can find details on both the Fuse website and on the Fuse Wiki. So I look forward to hearing from our working groups again next month at the next webinar Wednesday on the 23rd of May, which I'm reliably informed is World Turtle Day. So I'm looking for some themes on that one at that webinar. So look forward to hearing from you all then, and thank you very much for joining.
Thank you.